Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
What actually took place in Ricky Nelson's opulent former residence? Additional, Ricky Nelson was more than simply a teenage idol. He was a pioneer in rock and roll, one of America's first real pop cultural stars, and a television classic. Millions were enthralled by his passionate songs, boyish charm, and beautiful voice that characterized a generation. However, behind the fame and prosperity, his life changed in a tragic way. From an idyllic family to a private, Ricky's story is replete with tremendous sadness, love, and stardom despite his challenges. What actually took place during that tragic flight? What happened to his deserted home, his wife, kids, and the wealth he bequeathed finally? After 40 years, the truth has emerged, and no one could have predicted how shocking it would be. Although Ricky was raised in American living rooms, behind the scenes he was just a weak little child who was having trouble breathing every night, long before the celebrity. Though the #1 hits and yelling fans frightened Ricky Nelson as a child, quiet, he was born in 1940 and has long-term asthma. So bad that he frequently, in order to survive the night, they had to sleep next to a vaporizer and cling to the evergreen aroma. His universal have appeared flawless on TV, but in the private nooks and crannies of his house, Ricky was a youngster who was terrified of the dark, cameras, and possibly most of everything, terrified of letting down those who had centered their lives around his specter. "I hated missing school all the time," he once said. Everyone believed being renowned was enjoyable, but at the age of 8, all I wanted was to run. Not wise. He was introduced to Ozzy and Harriet's escapades in 1949, a choice he never created for himself. Week after week, millions of people watched him mature without understanding how much of his boyhood had been exchanged for script lines. A soundstage served as his playground, his playmates on a movie set. In his later years, Ricky would mutter, "I didn't decide to become well known. Everyone was seeing me grow up." Yet in the midst of the expectations and fatigue were two things that no one could take away from him. Music. At the age of 17. In 1957, Ricky discovered his identity, not for television or celebrity, but for love. He liked a girl who loved Elvis. He recorded a cover of I'm in order to get her attention. Strolling, and a change occurred. "I didn't want to be famous," he said, observing, "I only wanted her to like me in return." That small deed, motivated by adolescent desire, became the start of an illustrious musical career. From an asthmatic boy, Ricky transformed his suffering into music and quiet into cheers by using his borrowed fame. He was more than simply a hottie. He battled against disease, stress, and a perfect son's suffocating mold. Harriet, his mother, purportedly remarked, "Ricky always appeared composed, but I could tell he was feeling the weight of each grin." However, the weight of that mold was unknown to the world. The cameras captured only thellowing, not the sleepless nights or the tears. In the dressing room, the thought is genuinely devastating. Millions of people love this guy, but so frequently unafraid to let people down. His tale was more than just one of celebrity. It weighs about making it through it. It has to do with maturing before he could become a youngster. And maybe that's why his story is both so heartbreaking and so incredibly motivating, because Ricky refused to be engulfed by the shadows. He made his own illumination. He battled for room in every note he sung and every song he composed. Take a breath, with his soul as well as his lungs. In his own house. However, Ricky's voice was hardly audible as it became louder in the outside world. Early in the 1960s, he had becoming one of America's most prosperous young celebrities, a #1 on the charts musician, a popular figure on national television, and a heartthrob. His documents were selling for millions of dollars. His image was on the covers of every magazine. Additionally, Ricky Nelson was now a household name. Fixture. However, beneath the glittering exterior of celebrity, a teenager was imprisoned in a life that was not really his. Alcee Nelson, his father and the head of the Nelson brand, was in charge of Ricky's entire world, career and finances, even his picture. Ricky had already made over $500,000 by the time he was 18, the current equivalent of around $5 million. However, in spite of his wealth he produced, it was out of his reach. Every dime was within his father's authority, and Ricky was given only $50 a week to survive on. "I had funds in the bank," he subsequently said, remembered, grinning hollowly. "But in order to pay for movie tickets, my girlfriend and I had to pick up Coke bottles." His voice permeated living rooms and jukeboxes across the country, but at home he washedly heard. He was given choices regarding which tracks to record, who heckled, date, and what he ought to wear. America's favorite boy was being led like a character in a sitcom that never ends. Even worse, Ricky's emotional distance from his father grew. With achievement, once a friendly presence, Ozzy became into a greater emphasis on safeguarding the family brand, occasionally at the expense of Ricky's independence and contentment. Ricky's friends and family saw the tension, how he would go silent in his father's presence, how he would question his decisions, and how he never appeared completely at ease. Ricky once admitted, "In a rare moment of candor, I felt like a golden-stringed puppet, pricey, gorgeous, but still restrained." This wasn't merely the tale of a well-known child under pressure. This was a son's silent agony while his individuality was being formed. and sold before he realized his true identity. Additionally, in an effort to gratify Ricky, gradually started to lose himself in the eyes of everyone, fans, family, and the world. It is the real tragedy starts to emerge here, beneath the surface of fame. Millions of people love this young man, yet invisible in his own house. A son who wants to escape yet is constrained by fear, duty, and love. Even fairy stories throw deep shadows, but he believed that love might be the way out. In Christine Harmon, the daughter of Heisman Trophy winner Ricky Nelson, married him in 1963. Elise Knox, an actress and football player Tom Harmon. Their April wedding was nothing less than a Hollywood extravaganza that year. The flashbulbs exploded. Fans waited in line to see the golden pair, and reporters flocked that the merger of two American dynasties, as tabloids have dubbed it, wasn't merely Anyan, it happened. The immaculate teenage idol Ricky and Kristen Thea, Hollywood princess who appeared destined for a life straight out of a fairy tale. For once, the cameras adored Ricky's decision because it was in line with his mother's wishes. Even the infamously discriminating and cautious Harriet Nelson granted her blessing. The early years appeared to be ideal. They relocated to a lodge in the Hollywood Hills, a Spanish-style villa where family photographs and brightly illuminated rooms reverberated with laughter embellished each wall. Later that year, Tracy, their first child, was born. A lively young woman who inherited the silent strength and dark eyes of her father. Though the next 10 years were more joyful, Gunnar and Matthew, twin sons. In 1967 they were close and musically talented, and in 1974 they had their youngest son, Sam, a lovely boy, who liked to be in the background rather than the spotlight. Ricky, who was frequently worn out, he poured his aspirations into his family because of his reputation and the pressure of expectations, infamously remarked, "Until I watched Tracy sleep, I had no idea what peace felt like. It was a fresh start." Or so he hoped. In private he made an effort to be present, creating cartoons for Tracy, instructing his sons in chords, and watching Sam walked across the living room barefoot. He once said, "They were my sanctuary," informed a buddy. However, quiet may reverberate in even the most opulent mansions. Ricky battled to revive his faltering career and evolve into a more responsible musical approach. Kristen struggled with the loneliness that comes with being famous. Her universe ranging from premiere gowns to restless nights, from red carpets to school dinners. Evenings. Later, Kristen recalls, even when he was at home, he was gone. The tunes always come first. In the meantime, Ricky, under stress and Cantrell, discovered himself straying, emotionally aloof, and restless in his creativity. The same spotlight that was previously Shadar's between their hearts that once bound them together. Friends observed Thea's arguments became more acerbic, prolonged periods of silence, endless connections. In her own life, Kristen started to feel like a ghost, her identity declining in the wake of Ricky's legacy. "I didn't want to be," she once admitted. One more chapter in his tale. "I desired a narrative of my own," Ricky agreed, felt imprisoned by preconceived notions, past traumas, and a version of himself he no longer acknowledged. His efforts to adjust to shifting musical preferences were met with mixed outcomes, and fear frequently took the place of the excitement of performing. "One thing don't want," he informed his manager after a poor performance that night. "Me. They want a memory." In 1980, Kristen and her husband had been married for over 20 years, filed for a divorce. The court case was protracted, acrimonious, and devastating. Ricky wasted more than $1 million in accounting and legal fees, an astounding quantity that showed more than just financial gain. It was the metaphorical price of a life falling apart. The once famous American music and television star was now divorced, father of 4, hurt both financially and emotionally. Later, Tracy would compare that period of time to witnessing a lovely house burn down when nobody had a hose. "I tried to save a marriage," Ricky remarked candidly in a rare moment. "I didn't realize that it was already broken." Kristen also held regrets of her own. We were both lost, yet we loved him nevertheless. In spite of the suffering, they both stayed committed to their kids. Ricky kept penning songs, frequently motivated by the pain of being absent and a silent hope that perhaps he could still turn the wreckage into something lovely. His music became more edgy, less refined, and more truthful. He sung to keep himself sane, not to make the charts. And however, Ricky continued to sing despite his sadness. He went back to the studio, calmer but resolute. His melodies become more melancholic and filled with desire as well as loss. During this vulnerable time, he met Helen Blair, a relationship that offered Ricky something unique but that the world would never completely appreciate. Friendship without circumstances, however, that is a tale for another time. Since before to the final chapter, more heartache is yet to come. The type that no music can really capture like a whisper. She entered his life light-filled, unexpected, and kind. In 1980, amidst the debris of a damaged in the midst of a failing job and marriage, Ricky Nelson met Helen Blair, a part-time former tour helper and model. It's critical to comprehend by this point, Ricky and his spouse, Kristen Harmon, had already split up. They were far into their divorce process. which was completed in 1982. Helen did not dissolve a union. She came into Ricky's life at the beginning, of emotional healing and change, providing company instead of difficulty. To the outside world, she was simply a name in the distance. She was everything to Ricky. She didn't require the spotlight. All she wanted to do was stand next to him. And maybe it was what made her presence so strong. For a man who had dedicated his entire life to as he watched, Helen offered him the most precious gift of all, the ability to simply be. There the romance started out softly. She went on tours with him, avoided stage throughout his performances, and prevented him from being swept away by the commotion of the road. She was well organized, caring, and incredibly devoted, a source of peace in Ricky's otherwise chaotic existence. His buddies remarked on how much more relaxed he appeared, even if his kids are still getting used to their parents' divorce. Progressively, he came to embrace Helen's role. Even though some of Ricky's relatives and admirers disapproved, Helen never sought praise. "I don't require a ring," she allegedly said, informed a close friend. "It wasn't only love though. I just need him to know I'm here." That characterized their relationship. The timing was right. Ricky had changed from being a boyish teenager idol. He was a man who had experienced regret, loss, and renown. Helen didn't meet him at his pinnacle, but in his quest for tranquility, and she remained, not for fame, but for him. "She doesn't try to fix me," he once said to a bandmate. "She simply allows me breathe." Helen was more than just a friend by 1985. His emotional fulcrum was her his unofficial boss and the only person he had total faith in. They shared hotel accommodations, tour bus meals, and peaceful mornings full after. Ricky's eyes appeared softer and his grin more radiant in pictures from that time period, sincere for what appeared to be the first time in years that he had discovered a little off-serene. Sadly, their tale would come to an abrupt end just as abruptly as it started. In December, the private DC-3 plane that was transporting Ricky, Helen, and members of his Stone Canyon band crashed close to Dallas, Texas. After catching fire in midair, Helen and Ricky passed away together. Her body was discovered next to his. They were irreconcilable in both life and death. Harriet, Ricky's mother, a ligate liver, endorsed Helen, and following this, Helen's name was prominently not present at his funeral service. The plea from her family to be buried beside Ricky was turned down. It was silent, a razor that had a lot to say. However, for those who were closest to Ricky in his last years, there was no question. He selected Helen Blair as his love interest, not for the cameras, not for his soul, but for legacy. Consequently, when the world lamented the symbol, those closest to him lamented a deeper personal loss. A man who, following a lot of cacophony, had at last discovered quiet in the embrace of another person, right up until the end. That quiet was Helen Blair. Additionally, in their tragic conclusion, we witnessed there the purest form of devotion, the kind that shines without a spotlight. The 31st of December 1985. It was only going to be another concert. One last show to wrap up throughout the year. The Stone Canyon Band, Helen Blair and Ricky Nelson had performed to Guntersville, Alabama, sold-out performances, and were en route to Dallas, Texas, for a performance on New Year's Eve. The atmosphere was calm and the sky were clear. Illumination. Ricky made jokes with the band while Helen assisted them in loading their equipment. Pilots. The fact that this would be their final voyage was unknown to everyone. As they boarded the renowned vintage Douglas DC-3 airplane around 12:40 p.m. as the guide carried, which Ricky himself owned and ran. The plane had a reputation for being strong, yet there were actual and metaphorical fissures beneath that nostalgic exterior. The at 100 p.m. engines roared to life. They took off. Helen and Ricky sat close to the back, with friends, laughter, and plans for the evening. However, at approximately 5:08 p.m. something went wrong 35 miles west of Texarkana. Terribly incorrect. Over Fort Worth air traffic control, the pilot's clipped, strained voice crackled. "I believe I'd like to go back. I have a minor issue." Shortly after, smoke appeared in the cockpit. The cockpit is filled with smoke. The cabin was filled with panic. Smoke started flooding the aisles. As the cabin expanded, Helen held Ricky's arm tightly, heated and fume-laden. When someone yelled for the extinguishers to be grabbed, it was already too late. The plane quickly lost height. 5:14 p.m. saw radar contact. Lost. The aircraft skidded through power and crashed into a field in Dallas, Texas. Lines, and then catching fire. The heat caused the windows in the cockpit to blow out. The pilots crawled through, survived, and were stunned and scorched. However, inside the Ricky, Helen, the other 5 band members, and the cabin all died. Initially, responders discovered a burning wreck. The plane was described by witnesses, trailing smoke, then plummeting like a bird in distress. The source of the fire waste exact location of the aircraft's gasoline-powered heater, on the right side of the cabin. Days later, the NTSB's inquiry turned up damning evidence. Damage that is visible: pieces of molten metal, a hole in the air duct, and the heater shield. There had been a recognized problem with the heater. It had been warned of by earlier pilots. Records of maintenance suggested haphazard. No one took action despite repairs and hasty modifications that circumvented safety rules. Nobody. The aircraft was grounded, and that stillness became lethal that day. The co-pilot's testimony was terrifying. He claimed that the heater had been broken for a while. He remembers the pilot when questioned about the fire. "Don't tell anyone about the heater," was the only word that wafted in the mayhem turned into the eerie echoes of Ricky Nelson's dying moments. There were no emergency masks were worn, no escape, no fire checklist followed. The passengers never had a chance because it was a death trap. America was rocked by the announcement. Ricky Nelson is the young star of Gone in Flames is rock and roll, the kid who grew up in everyone's living room. His body was burned and misguided in transit, and he never made it back to California until a few days later. The 6th of January, 1986 in Los Angeles. The Church of the Hills was packed with 250 mourners, of them Connie Stevens, Colonel Tom Parker, and Angie Dickinson. However, one name was absent. Helen Blair from all funeral programs. In spite of being Ricky's associate and her name was allegedly removed in her latter years at Ricky's request. Harriet's mother. The family pleaded for Helen to be buried next to him. They were rejected. Quietly, faithfully, and without recognition, she lived till her death. She was the light in Ricky's final years, according to those who knew him the best. She calmed him in life. When she died, she took his hand. Nevertheless, history attempted to erase her. The final report from the NCEP stated that the cause of the fire was unknown, but refrained from assigning blame. The true cause, however, was evident to fans and loved ones. Carelessness, and only of the kindest spirits in music, was taken by an avoidable failure wrapped in red tape. The most heartbreaking aspect, Ricky didn't even get to perform that evening. Dallas fans awaited a performance that would never come on, and not only was there wreckage amid the ashes of the field near Dalb, but the woman and the unspoken aspirations of a guy who dedicated his life to music had handed him hers. Ricky passed away in smoke, distant from the limelight, yet his voice continued to reverberate. Even now, after several decades, his songs convey both the eerie beauty of what he left behind and the weight of what was lost behind. However, the heartache didn't stop there. In California again, Ricky's children were informed that their father would never return home. His oldest child, Tracy's daughter, apparently collapsed to the ground when she heard the news. Gunnar, as well as in an attempt to continue his musical legacy, Matthew cancelled all shows indefinitely. Sam, though the youngest, who was only 11 years old, didn't quite understand the loss. He later stated, continued to believe that he would enter as usual. Edith and Harriet, Ricky's mom, was distraught. According to her friends, she was an elderly woman. All night. Even though they had been at odds for years, she had loved Ricky with every strand of her body. His passing was more than a tragedy. There was an unraveling. Regarding his ex-wife Kristen, although she didn't speak in public, she was observed sobbing during a private vigil. It's possible that their romance ended in grief has a nasty way of softening what was once harsh, but so does bitterness. For the fans, it was a personal loss. Outside Forest Lawn Memorial Park, hundreds of people were waiting in line, leaving behind tear-stained letters, vinyl LPs, and flowers. "I grew," one fan wrote. "Ricky, I grew up with you, and now a piece of me is gone as well." Even now, decades later, one may feel Ricky's absence. In each episode that is rerun, in each vintage vinyl, the echoes of his life are still there, spun on a turntable, in the harmonies of his sons. However, the issue still remains. How many more fatalities like his are anticipated? Before change takes hold, how many warnings need to be disregarded? The last words of Ricky Nelson, "Not all moments ended tragically." They served as a reminder and a chilling condemnation that quietness in upkeep, formalities, and acknowledgement can. Ricky Nelson continued to sing despite his passing, not into a stage, not from any microphone, but via the suffering of his departed loved ones, as well as the tunes that still don't want to fade. Following Ricky Nelson's untimely demise, the suffering was widespread. Outside the scene of the collision, his formerly lively house in the Hollywood Hills, where he would laugh and the music that once filled the hallways, was now gone. A melancholy remnant of a life lived in the spotlight once. Ricky has invested sensibly during his lifetime, including a number of prestigious California residences. However, what was left behind after the fire was tragically little. Growing debt, poor management, and years of court cases. His estate lost its potential due to fights. Court documents state that Ricky's estate was believed to be worth slightly more than $500,000. Almost nothing compared to the wealth he had previously accumulated at the time of his death that, after accounting for inflation, is less than $1.40 million now. Instead of wealth, children were left with something much more durable: his music, his name, and the burden of a legacy enshrouded in awe and sadness. Helen Blair, the woman he loved till the end, had to deal with an even more destiny. Despite spending the final 5 years of his life with him constantly, the funeral program did not include her name. The request from her family, the Nelsons, refused to allow her to be buried with Ricky, and there was no public her name is on her grave. Later, her parents sued for wrongful death against Nelson Estate and the aircraft's charter business, only to agree to a small amount that hardly covered costs. She passed away while leading a modest, devoted life and not acknowledged. 1. What her pals was in mourning when not in use. Ricky's strain of loss caused the family to disintegrate. Tracy Nelson, just 22 years old, was thrown into a world of emotional turmoil and legal ambiguity. Later she remembered, "I just passed out the night I found out. I was unable to talk, make a move." The 18-year-olds Matthew and Gunnar were horrified, feeling as though the air had been torn out of the planet. Though the day following the incident, the twins were scheduled to take a plane to visit their father. Rather, speaking at their father's burial was an impossible assignment, and they had to deal with a flurry of the press. In an uncommon interview, "We lost more than a dad," Gunnar remarked years later. "Our foundation was lost." However, Ricky Nelson's voice persisted even after he passed away. 1987, long overdue, he was posthumously admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. After overcoming and surviving stage 2 Hodgkin's, Tracy discovered her calling in television. Lymphoma while accepting the complex legacy of the family. Gunnar and Matthew formed the band Nelson by turning their sorrow into music. Their first album was well received. Their hit song "Can't Live Without Your Love and Affection" is multi-platinum. Reached the top of the 1990 Billboard Hot 100 for the first time. The same family had earned chart-topping success for generations. Evidence of the musical lineage Ricky helped create. The youngest, Sam, did not participate in the spotlight, leading a quiet life, yet frequently showing up at ceremonies honoring the memory of his father. Despite lawsuits being filed and his house collapsing, bricks and bank accounts never revealed Ricky Nelson's genuine inheritance. It was present in each and every line he wrote, chord he played, and broken heart that was comforted by his songs. His admirers never ceased paying attention. They never ceased to remember and never ceased to grieve. He kept on playing music. To market. Vintage memorabilia still features his visage, and his legacy inspired biographical books, tribute concerts, and films. Even when you're silent, the voice of Ricky Nelson still reverberates. According to one journalist, not just in songs, but in each shattered heart that his music was able to mend. His tale was one of brilliance, trauma, and perseverance. Ricky Nelson was much than just a teenage sensation, who was a boy who was raised on TV, fell in love too deeply, suffered too much loss, and then left us too soon. He personified the brittleness of celebrity and the tenacity of the spirit of man. His life ended too suddenly, like a song. However, the tune ninjas inscribed on vinyl, ingrained in memories, and transmitted through. If you were moved by this story, please think about telling someone who still honors the heyday of rock and roll. Post a comment with your thoughts below. Favorite memory or song by Ricky Nelson. Additionally, remember to like and subscribe. For more touching tales from the heyday of Hollywood, since some Ricky's voice is one that never really goes gone.